Um, I guess we can get started. So, Rob, thanks for joining us. We really love the film. We're so excited to share it with our audience. Can you talk a little bit about the process of making it? It's such a detailed study, and you have such great archival footage that you use, home videos of Pauline Kael's writing that was rejected from the that she had written, and was the copy that was rejected. How did you kind of come across all that? It's great.
Well, it just took a lot of time and a lot of effort, I guess. I'm not sure what you mean by pieces of hers that were rejected.
There was there. I remember there were a couple New Yorker or there were a couple like lines that were edited that her editors would come back to her, and so you had the original
Oh,
copy.
The labia.
The copy edits. Yeah, those weren't rejections. Those were just copy edits from her editor.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's what you're talking about, the William Shawn edits. But anyway, the thank you for having me. And it's I don't know anybody in Buffalo, but I know a lot of people just over the border in Welland, Ontario.
Mm-hmm.
Near the canal.
Yes, where my girlfriend grew up, and I know her, a lot of people around there. And anyway, I'm happy to do this, and I just really wanted to express how weird this is. Just first of all, to be talking to my phone and have everybody on their phone. I mean, it's better than nothing, but let's face it, it's not a movie theater, and let's hope that you guys get back on your feet like everybody else soon. But anyway, the movie is something that was just a labor of love. I read Pauline Kael as a kid. I started making movies as a teenager in high school, and when I read Pauline, it was just kind of like she was one of us, one of me and my friends. She was a person who was just passionate about movies and ideas and actors, and she was sensitive to the tone and the moods, and she didn't miss anything. She was somebody that you could read whether or not you agreed with her, whether or not you liked the film, whether or not you saw the film that she was writing about, because she was just such a natural writer and kind of really performer and entertainer in her own right. So I don't say that to mean that she was somebody who didn't take her writing seriously, or wanted to write more about herself in the movie. No, she was a very serious and thoughtful writer, but she knew that movies were at their basic level fun, and I think she wanted to deliver that to the reader, and she didn't want to be a critic who checked the boxes of this is cinematography 2 stars and acting 3 stars, etc. She wanted to write about the ideas and the feelings that she felt while she watched the movie. So that was the spark for me wanting to make the movie, is reading her as a young person. And then when I started making the movie 4 years ago, I don't remember what the spark was, but I read something about her on the internet, and I guess I was kind of surprised to find out that nobody had done it yet. So I eventually, this was like the summer of 2014, I reached out to her daughter and went up into Great Barrington, Massachusetts, where she lives, and met her, and kind of asked for her blessing and told her that what I wanted to do, and she was not on board with it. I had to convince her over time. I sort of started anyway and kept her abreast of what I was doing, and eventually showed her a 20-minute rough cut after about a year, I think, and then she shared some photos with me, and then the home movies, and then she finally sat down for an interview. And so by that time I had done all the interviews. We had a lot of the other critics and Pauline's friends and Quentin Tarantino and David ORussell and I just sort of started on this journey, and I hadn't made a feature documentary before. So it was, it was kind of new to me, but, I really knew what I wanted right from the beginning. I wanted to try to tell Pauline's story cinematically, and I didn't want to make a dry PBS documentary. I wanted to make something that reflected who Pauline was, which was a woman who had this sense of fun in her work. And I didn't really know anything about her own story, and so I got into that, and found that was interesting too. She was really a late bloomer, and she was sort of one of the boys, kind of. I mean, she had more men friends than women friends. She didn't have any real long-term relationships. She had a marriage that lasted for a year. And her first love was really not just movies, but books and movies and music and theater and art. I mean, she loved it all. And that's one thing that I learned as I went, by going to her archives and talking to people who knew her, and getting to know Gina, and reading a very good biography that was written by Brian Kello about 6 years ago. And Brian is in my movie too, and he actually passed away at 59 2 summers ago, I think. He had a sudden brain tumor, but it was sad. But he did a great job with that book, I thought, and he really helped me in the beginning stages of the project, getting in touch with some of the people that I needed to talk to. So that was, it was really like a 4-year journey from the time I reached out to Gina until we premiered at Telluride.
I think what I really love about the film, and I was reminded, I watched it again last night. I'd seen it last year at the Montclair Film Festival, but I was reminded of the Jonathan Gold documentary about the food critic, and how they were talking about how he'd sort of, like, his writing would invite people to sort of sit with him at the table, and she was in a way also doing that too, inviting people to kind of sit with her at the cinema, and she was writing about the audience reaction. So that was something that I really appreciated, that detail there, and kind of the structure of the film sort of, I think, invites us to see these movies, I think, through her lens. You'd mentioned there's a longer cut of the film that's going to be premiering soon, or?
No, the 98-minute is the longer version. I originally had, the next step after we shot it and we did all the research is started to edit it, and I ran out of money and decided to edit myself. I did have some help, but I took on the bulk of it myself. We just lost you there, I think, for a second, John. There you are. Now you're back.
I'm back. Okay.
When I started editing, that was when I really, saw the film come together and was able to put all these things together. But I'm sorry, but I forgot your question.
It was more of a general comment, but we actually do have a guest who emailed us. Ricky, do you want to talk, or nod if you want to? Okay, I'm going to unmute you for a second. We have someone who watched the film this weekend and has a question for you. Ricky?
Yeah, I was curious to know, like, what your process was for deciding, like, who to interview, because you had people like Quentin Tarantino and David ORussell and Alec Baldwin, and they obviously seem to be fans of her work, but, like, how did you know they were fans of her work, or how did you set out and think, we're going to find people who read her and then interview them, or we're going to find people who were affected by her writings, and like, just how you would, because your influence was so broad, like, how did you begin to sort of narrow the search to find people?
Right. Well, that's a good question. I really wanted, as I said, for it not to be a kind of a dry PBS documentary, and I knew I wanted to have people from different parts of her life and also people who didn't agree with her or had critical things to say about Pauline, and there are a lot of those people. But of course, I made the film because I loved her writing, so that's the point of view I started from. But Tarantino, he's done interviews before about his influence with Pauline, and he told me a great story about how when he was 15, he saw her on TV, and he thought she was great and went to the bookstore and kept going back to the bookstore to read her book because he didn't have any money, he couldn't afford to buy it. And but he became, he says that she was his film school, really, because he didn't go to film school. So I knew that. David ORussell, I reached out to just really kind of with the idea that I thought he might have read her and been influenced, and I didn't know, but it turned out that he was kind of like Tarantino. I reached out to some others, like Alexander Payne, and a couple of others kind of in that generation. But Tarantino and Russell were the ones who decided to sit down. And then, of course, I wanted her contemporaries like Paul Schrader and directors who she reviewed, and maybe she knew them or maybe she didn't, like John Borman, she knew casually. Schrader was really like a protege of hers. She really got him his first job as a critic before he became a screenwriter and a director. And then I did an audio interview with Francis Ford Coppola, who, she wrote about a lot of his films, and some others. And then, I wanted to have I got playwrights, right? I didn't want just film people. I wanted people from the other arts. So I have John Guare and Christopher Durang. They're very brief appearances in my film, but I just wanted a different point of view. And then I have 3 people from the industry. I have Tom Pollock, who ran Universal Studios in the 80s, and Marcia Nassatir, who was a friend of Pauline's, who was one of the first female executives in Hollywood, and also was in publishing and published Pauline's first book as a paperback. And then I have David Picker, who passed away in the last year, but he ran United Artists when they put out Last Tango. So he had that great story to share. And then, of course, had other critics as well. And, I really tried to get people to talk honestly about Pauline and not just say the nice things about her, but, there were a lot of, some ugly things too about Pauline. And so, I felt those should be part of the conversation too, because Pauline was never one to, put a filter on herself, and she didn't like it when other people had a filter. She was, sometimes too honest, maybe, or brutally honest, or ruthlessly honest. But I wanted to carry some of that over into my film.
Yeah, the David Lean clip it wrecked me. I felt so bad for him.
It's kind of a sad piece, but it's also, to me, it's kind of funny as well. I mean, he was one of the most respected directors in the business at the time, and the fact that he could allow one person's opinion to stop him from working for several years, to me, is just, it's crazy. But he was obviously a very sensitive person, and I don't think that's the whole truth. I think that's, I don't know, that clip is amazing. I agree. It's startling, but he really seems wrecked by her. But I think that Pauline probably wasn't the only reason he didn't make a movie for so long.
Yeah, I agree.
It's probably dangerous to assume this, but I like that you explore what would have been, her in the era of Rotten Tomatoes, and you have those kind of biteable quotes that, would be the type of thing that critics would. But what do you think in terms of what she would find pretentious today and what she would like? Is that a dangerous question to ask? Is there, Is there a certain kind of, if we had to kind of posit what sort of auteur she would be embracing if she was still, with us today?
Well, she wasn't predictable. I think David Edelstein says it in my movie. You could never predict what she would say. I mean, I wonder too. I wonder for what she would think of Christopher Nolan. Would she be really impressed, or would she think he was kind of full of shit, like she sort of thought Stanley Kubrick was? I don't know, but I think she would have. You asked me this in the email interview, but I think she would have probably embraced television and what television is doing, since there's really, they're really indivisible now, practically. But before she passed away in 2001, she was watching The Sopranos and Sex and the City, and she enjoyed both of those programs. And I think there would be a lot of the new programming on Netflix and Hulu and Amazon that, some of it she would probably hate, and some of it she would probably really love. She was always good at just finding little things that she liked, and she could really bring a detail, a small, an actor's performance, or a way of directing like De Palma had that would strike her, and she would just bring that alive. And you may not feel the same way when you see the movie, but you feel what she feels because of how good a writer she is.
Sort of like you're right there with her, in terms of experiencing the film. I love that quote where, so, was it Tarantino or Russell said that, or somebody else who said it, where you'd be experiencing the film sort of the first, you'd seen the film, but you'd be experiencing again through her writing, how she would bring it in. Anybody else have any? I'm just going to throw it out to the audience. Anybody have any questions about the film?
There's a couple that have been emailed in.
Okay.
One question is, how did you get the rights to use all the materials that you used? Did you assume fair use because they all appeared in Kael reviews? Or did you have to reach out to each individual maker for their rights?
Well, I don't know if they're talking about the film clips or the archival material, but I'll talk about both. The archival material I had to clear and pay for, just like any other documentary filmmaker does. So all the television interviews she did, Dick Cavett show, Johnny Carson, those things are very expensive actually, and just even to use 20 seconds of them is expensive. And so the photographs and the newspaper articles, some of that is public domain and some is not. And I went through a very good law firm that helped me determine that, and I had to make a log of the film and every piece that I used. But the movie clips are used under fair use. And some people don't know what fair use is. Fair use is not a law, but it's an aspect of the law which says basically, if you are using a piece of copyrighted material in a different way to make your own point, sort of transforming it and not using it for its own entertainment value, then it qualifies for fair use. And so, because I was using most of those clips to display Pauline's point of view, that qualifies for fair use. But I went through a law firm and we made a log, and I had to get a letter from the law firm. And then, of course, you get what's called E&O insurance if you're a documentary filmmaker that protects you if you are sued. But, I had to take out some clips and cut back some clips because they said you're using too much of this. But really my goal was to really not use that much of the clips or use them for their own entertainment value, because I never wanted the audience to be in the head and the heart of the film itself, like The Godfather. I didn't want to play the theme of The Godfather so people would start to have those feelings. I wanted people to always stay in Pauline's head. And so, you know, the suggestions of fair use to use as little as possible was what I wanted to do also.
It makes sense, and in my humble opinion, I think you did an excellent job of using them for commentary beyond the, you know, nostalgia of the clip. But
Oh, thank you.
it's something that comes up a lot here. We have a lot of young developing documentary filmmakers in Western New York, and if you teach classes around here, they're always wondering about fair use. They have some interesting interpretations. So,
Yeah. Well, find a good fair use lawyer, because you know, the fair use laws have become a little, or guidelines have become maybe a little more lax, but you know, you can still be sued, and it's always good to go through a good fair use lawyer.
We get a lot of questions about that for the film festival. I get a lot of young students that are submitting work and asking if they could use a song, and I always say, no, don't do that, don't do that. You know, find your own.
Oh yeah, music especially is they're very litigious. They, you know, they find that you're using their material without paying for it, they'll come after you.
I mean, was there any? I mean, obviously you made decisions about what films to include and what films not to include, but I was really struck because it is, you know, her story really is sort of the history of cinema up to a certain point, you know, and she's going back and talking about the silent films that influenced her and her opinions on Chaplin, especially in the documentary. And you talk a bit about that. I mean, that must have been kind of a joy to watch that many films to make this movie, and sort of like a film history education in its own, I think.
Yeah, so I didn't watch them all, but I mean, I had watched many of them, you know, in my life. I started watching movies as a teen, so, and I've always loved classic movies, so that was more fun than anything else. But yeah, it was, you know, it was like really putting together a big puzzle, because some pieces fit and some pieces didn't, and I always wanted to use a clip from, you know, the era of whenever we are at in Pauline's life, and so it, you know, that made it more difficult, but you know, I think it makes it for a better movie.
Great. Anna, do you have any more questions from readers or from viewers, I guess, not readers?
there's a couple. They're a bit redundant from the interview that we did, but maybe we'll just do them anyway.
Sure.
What are your favorite Kael reviews, and why?
Yeah, well, Save the Tiger, which a lot of people haven't seen, but it's a movie from the 70s with Jack Lemmon, who plays a garment district businessman. He's in the garment business, fashion business, and he's kind of this hard-driving guy, and the story is about the kind of choices that he makes to try to save his business. And it's reading Pauline's review after seeing that movie kind of made me see things in the movie that I hadn't seen when I watched it. And that's, you know, that's what Pauline, it's one of the many things she does as a great writer, but it's one of the great things she does, because it makes you appreciate something in a different way, you know, which I think is a great thing a critic can do, because it's taking you beyond what you've seen and felt about anything, a movie or a book or a piece of art. You know, the critic is pointing something out to you that makes that movie or book so much better, because you know, you're seeing it from their point of view, and you're seeing something that you didn't see yourself. And so that's one. Another one is, well, two of my favorite pieces are Raising Cain, and her piece on Bonnie and Clyde. And those are both great because they show how much knowledge she had about movies, and also just about history and culture and the psychology of the people who made these movies. And, you know, Bonnie and Clyde, for instance, is kind of a history of the 30s and gangsters and 30s movies and other movies that were set in the 30s. And so, you know, by the time she gets to Bonnie and Clyde, you kind of understand, you know, the history of movies up until that point. And you know, she's just she's comprehensive. You know, she does her research too, and she, you know, she found out about the script and how that evolved and how it was almost, I think, Bonnie and Clyde directed by Truffaut or Godard, or they were offered it at some point, I think. And then Warren Beatty got involved, and it turned out to be an American production. But you know, those are the kinds of things that she brings to her writing. Is that it's never just one thing. So those are pieces. That and Trash Art in the Movies also is a great piece. It's very long, and she includes reviews of movies within the essay, but it's basically about, you know, how just because a movie is regarded as trash doesn't mean it's to be ignored, because there are always things you can find in movies that you like. And you know, she points out many of them in that essay.
Absolutely, and I love seeing polyester pop up as well.
Right, with Divine.
A personal favorite, and I love Divine. They were divine. There are some more questions coming in now. If people want to ask them themselves, they can. The first one up is Shario.
We're also monitoring that as well.
Oh, okay. So I'll just,
But yeah,
we have 3 sets of questions going from different places, but it seems like she was a critic who could make or break a film's success. Do you find, as you went through her history with interviewing filmmakers, that they were angry with her? Obviously, there's the one example from the film, and held on to it at all. I was struck with how one person's opinion could have so much sway. Did that kind of power ever go to her head? Did she stay true throughout her career? Ooh, these are great questions.
Yeah.
If you want to look in the comments, they're there as well, Rob.
Okay. I don't have that up on my screen, but that's okay.
Oh, okay.
You know, I think she well, she may have let things get to her head, but I think, you know, basically before 1980, which was, you know, she retired in 91, and she started writing in the 50s. And, you know, I think she wrote in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And by the time that decade ended, you know, she'd written so much and said so much about movies, and about individual movies, of course, but about kind of all aspects of movie making, that I think, you know, that's probably why she went to Hollywood, not only to make money, but to try something new, because she was very, you know, she's a brilliant person and gifted, but not in the way of a person who's can create something from scratch, I guess. You know, Pauline's gift was that she could write about other works of art, other movies, other books. So I think maybe in the end of her career, maybe she was, or maybe even when she first came to the New Yorker, she got a little bit heady. But, you know, to read that writing at that time is, you know, it's definitely full of itself. But, you know, there are people who are full of themselves and are full of shit, right? Like maybe some of our leaders, I don't know. But Pauline, you know, she was definitely full of herself, but, you know, she was just so rigorous and thoughtful and analytical, and also, you know, she could write with great feeling about something. And so, you know, to me, she gets a pass because maybe she's full of herself, but she's also all those other things. And, you know, she makes sense, and she respects the reader, I think.
Great. And we also have another question here that's in the chat. Wondering if you could talk about how you decided to structure the films from Meg Knowles. Did you try different things, or know from the start how to begin and end the movie?
No, but in the beginning, I actually wanted to do a non-linear, non-chronological telling of her story, and so I had things mixed up a little bit, and I had also had a 2-hour and 6-minute cut, which was reduced to the length it is now. And so the DVD actually is coming out in a couple of weeks. You can pre-order it now on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, but that has some scenes that we cut. Like there's a scene on Blue Velvet, there's a scene on Pauline's youth, there's a scene on her interview with Alfred Hitchcock that's never actually been heard before, but I couldn't include in the film. And it's a process of just trying to find things that were that really, because it was so hard to narrow down what stayed in and what stayed out. I mean, she wrote thousands of reviews, but I wanted the pieces that I did show and the movies that I focused on to either be kind of important turning points in her career, or they told her own personal story. So it was, in the end, it became a chronological movie, and I'm very happy with that. And I think it's it makes it easy to watch, and because there is so much going on in the culture and with movies that I think the viewer, it would be more confusing to do it out of order.
Sure. Anna, is there any last questions that you have there, or any of the best of the last questions you have there?
There's a couple more that I think actually have been covered, but one that hasn't. What's next for you, Rob? What are you working on?
Well, I'm working on some fried rice with chicken for dinner. And that's actually next up. And no, I have 2 projects that I'm working on, and 2 scripts that I've written. One is finished. It's a kind of a straight out comedy, and another one is a musical thriller set in the 1920s New York. And I hope when the smoke clears from the virus that I can start to get some traction with those. But I don't have another documentary that I'm working on now, but I'm definitely open to that if a good idea comes along. So, and this film will also be shown on, I can't officially announce it yet, but a major cable network in the fall, and so we'll be able to announce that pretty soon.
Great. We'll be sure to share it with our. One last one we had here. At one point, okay, we talked about fair use a little bit. Would you suggest a documentary filmmaker consult with a fair use lawyer, or any other kind of lawyer if he feels that they need to be brought in? I think maybe you should always consult with a lawyer whenever you do anything, right?
I guess just what I was trying to put in there was, I was wondering if you could elaborate on just when, I guess, is the time to consult with a lawyer, or like, are there indicators that you feel? It's probably just self-explanatory, but I was just wondering if you could elaborate on the bringing in of lawyers, and like at what point do you say to yourself, we're going to need some protection with this, or this could be
Well, yeah. I mean, it shouldn't be unless you're releasing a film. If you're making a film and you get to the point where you have a distributor interested, they're going to want to know that everything is signed off on. So, whenever your film gets real, that's when you need to have a lawyer. And if you're just making something for YouTube, obviously, you still have to be careful, because you can't use copyrighted material, especially music, unless you've cleared it. So, but anyway, that's a really specific question, filmmaking question. If John, if you wanted to share my email address with him, I'd be happy to answer a question like that on email.
Sure. One more quick question that's mine. Can you just speak a little bit more about the score? It's so lovely.
About what?
The score in your film?
The score. Oh.
Yeah, it's so lovely. I know we're over time, but just one more, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, the score was done by Rick Bates. He's a New York composer. He teaches at Juilliard here, and He's a friend of mine. He did a great job, and he did the score, under pressure, because we had just gotten to Telluride in June, I think, and Telluride was at the end of August, and we basically holed up for a couple months in the summer, and well, he did. I mean, I worked with him, but he composed the music, and the theme that he created, I really liked, and he's an excellent composer, and I think the film has a little bit of the lyricism of Pauline in it. I think that's really what I wanted to kind of bring out. But because my film has so many allusions to other movies, there's a great opportunity for him to sort of riff on themes like West Side Story and Psycho, and he does that in the score, and it's subtle, but if you listen for it, you'll pick it up.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much. We really love the film. Hopefully we'll have you in your next project in Buffalo. And any last words? Or
thank you, John. Thank you, Anna.
Just extreme gratitude to all of you who came and asked such thoughtful and interesting questions, and to Rob, of course, for making this absolutely beautiful film and elevating a strong woman who certainly deserves it. And yeah, I can't wait to see what you produce next.
And if you haven't seen the film yet, you can rent it from PaulineKaelMovie.com and do select Buffalo as your virtual cinema. That's going to be available to rent until the end of the month. And then the film will be on DVD very shortly afterwards, and then on a broadcast network we can't talk about soon. But be on the lookout for it. We'll share it when we can talk about it. Thanks,
guys. That was fun. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you so much.
Have a good night.
You too. Thanks.